We'll now move on to another transformative view. We're going to talk about machines and how they matter to the world and how they matter to space. And to do this, I'm joined by Karthik Gollapudi, who is not from Stealth Company, but is now from a company that can proudly tell you its name. So, Karthik, what are you called?
Our company name is SIFT.
And what is it that you do?
We're building the end-to-end telemetry stack for any sort of modern machines.
The end-to-end stack in what way?
All the telemetry tools you need. So a lot of people here work on space products. We build the tools to ingest data at scale, to store that cost efficiently, to visualize that, to do data review, and eventually we want to help you automate your constellations and machines.
How did you come into that?
Well, I actually spent the last 5 years at SpaceX before this. Mm-hmm. They have a few machines in space. You might have heard of them.
Yeah, we have mentioned some of their machines.
I was one of the Dragon flight software leads. So I was in charge of a lot of mission-over-mission operations for this Dragon spacecraft, carrying astronauts, cargo, things like that. And we just needed better tools to really understand our machine performance. So we built our own. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed is after I left, a lot of my other friends were actually building, they were also building these complex machines, and they need to go build a lot of similar tools. I thought that was a little silly, so how about I just go build it for you guys? And that's what we've been hard at work building, and now we get to reveal the name of the company and bring it to the world.
Why SIFT?
Well, a lot of it is about finding that like nugget of that nugget of truth, right? It's very common in our industry in space doing data review. You have to understand what is your machine doing, then you have to sift through all this data. So we figured, why don't we give you the full SIFT stack?
It strikes me, and we talked about this a bit before offline, you have a different sort of notion of what it is for a machine to be a machine, or what it is machines are becoming. As though machines are now sort of like developing, they live both in the physical world and in the information world. Can you say a bit about that, this idea that the operations of a machine are part of the actual machine?
Yeah. You know, this is actually part of this. There's a lot of shifts right now happening in machines. There's a lot more software. This isn't the type of world where you have one guy who's like this whisperer that understands everything that's happening. Machines are getting more and more complex, a lot of different subsystems, doing mission critical things like taking people to the space station or providing satellite infrastructure for us. And these machines are relying on more and more software. And that's where we're seeing a lot of this complexity where people are starting to get tripped up. You've been probably hearing about some pretty high profile failures now, more recently, that are all software related. And it's kind of crazy because we grew up in this world where the space shuttle had like frozen O-rings or like ice hit the shuttle, but now it's mostly software failures. And a lot of that is the complexity that we're hoping to solve.
Just going back on that and thinking about space shuttle safety, does the pilot on a Dragon do anything?
They have the ability to do stuff, but they don't have to.
Quite an answer to the question.
You know, they are fully trained, but if everything is going well, then the engineers who built the machine should be able to build everything in there so that the capsule can dock and take care of itself autonomously.
I find this idea that machines actually have their behaviors built into them. Does that mean there's a famous book by George Dyson taking a title from earlier, Darwin Among the Machines? Are machines becoming more like creatures?
You know, it's interesting you say it like that, right? Because I think maybe an individual machine, not so much, but when you start thinking about constellations, fleets, think about Starlink, you have to rebalance this entire constellation. If there's one outage, the entire rest of the constellation can rebalance, provide it's like a network now. You're right, it's like a living network, almost like a flock of birds or like something like that. So yes, you are correct. And that's actually part of what we're trying to help and facilitate people to do with their machines. Mm-hmm. Because traditionally it was this idea where you have R&D, somebody builds these machines, then you have these operators. You have like space operators controlling these complex machines. But that just doesn't scale, right? So if you have one or two satellites, totally fine. You have a mission operator sitting in mission control, listening, looking at all the data. But what about when you start having 4,000 satellites? What about when you start having hundreds of
So does
self-driving
it go
cars.
up? Do you think it goes up linearly or exponentially? If I have 4,000 satellites, can I get by with 4,000 operators, or do I actually start needing something more?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is those 4,000 operators all need to talk to each other, coordinate, operate as a fleet, and that just doesn't really scale. So a lot of what we're trying to build into into this world is this idea of, when you're saying machines are encoded with behaviors, our idea is that the engineer who does R&D and builds that machine in the first place, they should encode all the logic. They should encode how does this machine behave in the whatever operating environment it's in. And that engineer knows the tolerances. They know what things are going to break. They know how their batteries are going to charge and discharge. That engineer should be programming all the behaviors. And then that way, when this device is out in the field, you don't even need a space operator. You don't need anyone controlling these.
And that's different from just a sense of autonomy. That's something more, I'm gathering.
Yeah, I would say, because I think autonomy tends to apply to like individual devices. But we're seeing this actually in our customer base, actually. A lot of our customers, they're similar to Starlink in the sense that instead of one complex machine, they have a large constellation. We see someone doing this in nuclear energy. We see someone doing this in transportation with self-driving trains. And all these things have to operate in a coordinated fashion at scale. And that's where I would say that autonomy at scale is what we're trying to solve.
Do you think in some ways, because it's so distant, because it has to be so autonomous, that the satellite constellation is sort of like the epitome of what this sort of technology is like, that we're going to see it as the model that other things are going to look a bit more like? Yeah,
I mean, the space industry has a history of innovating and pushing the boundary, and we start seeing those patterns replicated across the rest of the world. So I would say that's actually a great point. We saw that with Starlink, but now we're seeing it in energy, transportation, aviation, and other fields.
And do you think what does that mean for people? If the machines are really that good at it, there's been a tension going back throughout the history of the space age between doing stuff with astronauts and doing stuff with machines. And always the argument has been, but the astronauts are so much more versatile. Do you think you're working on making that less true?
I think there's still going to be parts where you want humans in there, but the thing is, it's like, I don't think you need humans doing all the mundane work, and you also don't need humans doing the more dangerous work. And what we want to do is make it so that humans can do the things that humans do best, decision making and building this logic in the first place into the machines. But when it comes to putting your devices and things in very dangerous operating environments, you should let the machines do that.
I think there's a lovely faith in your idea that humans do decision making particularly well. I sort of think that, one of the things that's been coming to me throughout this meeting since Chad's talk this morning is this idea that space is becoming more a machine-on-machine realm. I mean, once you really get up and out of the Earth's gravity well, doesn't it become a real machine land?
Yeah, I mean, there aren't too many people up there, so yes, literally yes, figuratively, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the devices and hardware that's up there, it's going to be increasingly automated, and you need smarter machines that are going to be operating in that environment.
So tell me a little bit. I'm intrigued about the nuclear application as well, because people will be concerned when they hear about machines behaving in their own way with nuclear power. What's the application there?
Well, I mean, I think one question is just think about driving. Humans are fallible. They could be drunk. They could be tired. With your nuclear reactors, do you really want somebody who could be affected by human factors controlling that?
This is the Homer Simpson argument, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think you'd much rather have fail-safe systems that know how to operate. They have way more levels of fault tolerance built in there. And I would actually rather trust something that's built well and fault tolerant rather than relying on a human. This actually goes back to an argument of elevators. Originally, the history with the elevator is that they would have elevator operators because people didn't trust getting in a metal box. But the issue was people would, when the elevator operator closed the door and someone's arm was still in there, it would close on their arm. So what they decided is we're going to automate the whole thing and put some music in there to calm you down. So that's the history of elevator music.
Right, I did not know. Yes, they could have just pumped mood-altering substances in, but we got Muzak instead. Maybe it's cheaper. I live in Greenwich in Britain, where we have a light railway, which is entirely driverless. But it turns out that and there was a lot of discussion about whether people would be happy to go on a train that very clearly didn't have a driver. And it turns out that they quite like it as long as there's someone who's not a driver, who's sort of like taking tickets and looking at other things. They like the human touch, but the human doesn't have to be in control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we'll just get more and more used to that. It will become more commonplace.
So I want to check slightly. One thing that strikes me, I mean, you said you worked on Dragon. I went to the delightful mixer that was being held down the south of here yet last night, and I came across a lot of people who used to work at SpaceX. Is this the secret addition of SpaceX to the LA community, that it's, as it were, throwing off lots of engineering talent?
Yeah. You know, it reminds me a lot of, I've been reading about Fairchild Semiconductor.
I was just about, okay, yeah.
So exactly, yeah, Fairchild Semiconductor, I think there's like 92 publicly traded companies that trace their lineage to people who worked at Fairchild Semiconductor. And right now at SpaceX, we've spun off, I think there's about 70 or so companies. None of us are publicly traded yet that I know about. But, I mean, some of these founders in this room even, you probably saw that very cool rover out front. Mm-hmm. That's from Astrolab.
If you haven't seen the cool rover, having plugged it because I was told to before lunch, I've now gone down to see it, and I'm now plugging it very sincerely. It really is a very lovely rover.
Yeah. It's very cool, and there's a lot of these SpaceXers who learned how do you build modern machines, how do you build machines in a way that you can do it under budget, you can do it within schedule, and a lot of them actually relied on these types of tools, these modern hardware engineering tools, and that's actually what we're building at SIFT, and we're providing these tools to everyone else to build machines the way that a lot of these ex-SpaceX companies are building them.
Are you open sourcing them?
In the future, there's like a nuanced answer to it, but yeah.
No, let's have the nuanced answer. We can deal with some nuance.
There's like parts you can open source, but you can't open source all of it. And then there's also a lot of our customers just kind of want to not think about this, and they would much rather build the hardware. They'll let us build all their software. We can scale their systems. We can manage all that headache and DevOps challenges.
Isn't there a slight contradiction there that they're actually not doing it the way that you think it should be done? Because you think that the hardware and the software people should be really tightly together, right?
Yes, I guess that's also another nuanced answer, right? There's hardware, there's software, and then there's all the IT that's the glue that keeps it running. Mm-hmm. We'll take care of all this IT glue.
Right.
But they're still going to do all the software for their machines, and we encourage them to do that, and we'll give them the tools to test that, integrate that, and launch their vehicles.
So what machines do you think could be made in this way that can't be made? I mean, maybe you'd say Starlink couldn't be made any other way, but what other things?
You know, I would hate to say it's impossible to build these other things, but it gets very difficult. And what we're starting to see is that if you don't build machines in a modern way, you start having these accidents. We might have seen like the iSpace, they were trying to land on the moon and then do some simulation bugs, ended up crashing the lander. Or you saw Boeing with their Starliner, the competitor Dragon. That was a big wake-up call because I was working on the competitor at Dragon, and I was surprised to see that if you look at the press release, it's basically just a bunch of like, due to poor software testing, we had this cascading series of software failures that caused like this other like software issue. So you can build it. Mm-hmm. It might just cause you to have a lot of mishaps along the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, presumably you can build it. We don't know that iSpace will land on the moon next time. But under most of your clients, you talked about the nuclear case, are most of your clients in space, or?
Surprisingly, actually, less than a third. Mm-hmm. We have transportation, energy, aviation, probably some that I'm not thinking through, and robotics, mm-hmm. and space. And we have some very, very fun, very large space partners who are using us as actually.
Well, and so talking about very large space partners, what has now become, because I enjoyed it so much on the last panel, my question for the day, how many satellites are there going to be in space in 10 years' time?
Ooh, you mean with or without Starlink?
I mean, all.
All? In what timeline?
2033. And, you know, there are drinks being bet on this at this very moment.
I would guess satellites that we can interact with, not just junk, right?
Yeah.
I would guess
Active satellites.
I would guess somewhere in the order of magnitude of 40 to 50,000.
Okay. So you're in the middle of the range at the moment. Leo Labs are up there at 250,000. Boeing down there at not that many more than now. So I hope that some of them will be designed with using your techniques.
I hope so too.
Okay, thanks very much for
Thank
coming
you.
up, and good luck with the new company.
Thank you.